Hello to all my fans all around the world. I made Halloween cards and I went on a journey with them because I didn't really have much of a plan going into it. I just kind of knew vaguely what I wanted them to look like, but not really how to make them. So here first I was cutting the card bases and now I'm scoring and folding them. And then I used up a ton of my scraps that I keep in a drawer and cutting little black strips that I'm going to glue together to help give the card dimension for the shaker part thingy. And the cards didn't end up being like foldy cards because they would have been even thicker than they turned out to be. But I didn't obviously know that when I was first making it because I failed to plan ahead. But here I'm cutting acetate. I guess it's kind of hard to see, but this will be, the window for the front of the card. So my initial plan was to use heat embossing, like an embossing powder on some acetate, but the stuff I had it kept melting when I used the heat tool on it. So I bought some acetate that's good for that, but it just kind of looked bad. So I ended up just resorting to I had to buy some like special ink for non-porous surfaces, and it worked out pretty well. Well, it worked out well enough. And that is a background stamp that I was very excited to use, so I'm really happy that I got to use it, but this was incredibly messy, that step, and it took forever. So here's another step that was messy and took a long time. I wanted to use glitter paste because I thought it would be fun, and it was. But I also didn't think about how the shaker elements in the card would get caught on the glitter because it's like dimensional. So that was a bad call on my part, but at least it was fun to do and it looked cool. And it's going over like this cool holographic paper that I found a while back. And I'm glad that I had an excuse to use it. I like the reflective rainbow effect thingy. And I'm using a palette knife that I bought years ago when I took a painting class one semester. And then that's an old Culver's gift card that I found in my wallet. And I taped it down to help me not have to position it every time, that stencil. I put it on like a hinge thingy. And here I am gluing down those strips like I mentioned because I wanted to put the shaker elements were too thick to just like not have that like space in between, and foam tape doesn't hold up as well in the mail, so I went with this paper. And I made two different sizes for each length of the card. I cut 4 strips per stack that I wanted to make, and I made 4 stacks per card, and so that took a while. And then at this point I realized that if I just used those strips that I had glued together, then the card probably wouldn't hold up that well anyways, so I decided to die cut 4 for each card of the heavyweight cardstock that I have. I just have a whole ton of it in black, and this took like literally a whole day, but part of that is because I was busy like watching Final Fantasy VII playthroughs, because that's just kind of where I'm at right now. But I'm glad I did it because I think it made the cards look better and hold up better. And then just pretty much doing the same thing with gluing them down. I weighed these down. I put them underneath that glass mat that I'm working on to help flatten them and like press the layers together, because they were bending quite a bit before, or like warping. You can't really tell just from the video, but I switched living rooms in the middle of this, and that took like a week of like getting settled and catching up on homework and whatever. So that paste dried for like a week, which I guess worked out. And then this is the front of the card. I had to buy this cardstock, or this like glossy paper online, because my nearest craft store was out of stock for some reason, and they've never been out of stock before, but I guess I should have predicted that because it was like a week before Halloween at this point, I think. So here's me doing pretty much the same process that I've done in most of the cards I make when I'm just cutting out like a frame thingy, and then I save that smaller piece that cuts out for, I don't know, I'll use it for something. But here I'm gonna stamp the moon that is in the center on the finished card, and I wanted to make sure I stamped it on the same side that I stamped the trees because I wanted that facing inside so it wouldn't get like scratched up as much. And this was way easier to stamp. It was a lot less messy and it was a lot faster, which I appreciated. And then I couldn't really decide what to do for the background of the moon because I didn't have a different stamp color that I could use, and heat embossing was out, so I thought I would use some kind of, whatever paper I had that would look nice with it. And then, so that black stuff was the same black glossy paper that I used for the frame, and then I cut out some double-sided adhesive, and now I'm sticking them together. And I'm also using a bone folder to, like, smooth it down to make sure everything, adheres properly. And then I use this tiny die that I have, just a circle die, and line it up and cut out that I had the die already, and it ended up being the exact size I needed for the moon stamp that I bought for this. So I was pleased about that. But after I finished the glossy paper, double-sided adhesive die cut step, I realized that looked bad when I put it like behind the stamped moon. So I ended up going with this black vellum I had left over from the BTS cards that I made last year or whatever. And so I just did the same thing again, but with vellum, and I'll just save the glossy black circles that I made for some other kind of project. I'm not really sure what, but here is just me adhering the moon background thingy to the front of the card, the window or whatever. And then those stacked frames that I made earlier, I'm gluing down to the pasted background thingy. But I kind of misaligned the paste when I when I put it onto that holographic paper, because the ridges, I ended up having to use like a lot more glue because one of the sides wouldn't go down properly. So I really hope that doesn't show. This is me using more of that black heavyweight cardstock to cut what I was going to glue to the back of the card. And here I am going through each card and like testing out to see if there's any gaps, and then filling them in with more glue. And then you can kind of see at the top I use one of my basket storage thingies to weigh down the cards as I was going, just to help them dry flat. Here's the craft paper that I use to write all my message thingies on, and I have those lined like stamp thingies. Well, they're not thingies, they're just stamps. I'm just using that to, put down lines to write on because I think it looks nicer that way. And then, like I said, I was kind of doing this all as I was going. Like, I didn't really have enough of a plan in mind. So I thought the back looked too plain without anything. So I decided to go in with like a star stamp that I had from a set that I just kind of had in my stash, and use the anti-static powder tool to help me get all that extra powder off, and then heat emboss it. And then I kind of have a hard time lining those two pieces up though whenever I'd make cards like this. So I ended up going in with the black Sharpie to kind of make it look more uniform or finished or whatever. And uh, that ended up causing another problem, which was the Sharpie kind of sometimes went over the edge and scribbled onto the back, and it was really noticeable. So I went with a different background stamp I had and some that black ink that I was using earlier, and I did like a background tone on tone thing is what all the tutorials call it. And that ended up kind of hiding it a bit better, hopefully. So at this point, the clay bats that I did end up using, but at this point I was like, well, these cards are way too thick, so I need to find something thinner to put in them, because the bats were getting caught on the paste, like I mentioned earlier. And so I bought these sequin thingies, just like mix of whatever, and spent time separating them out. So like the bulkier parts I took out, but they were the sequins, the ghost and bat sequins were super staticky. So I ended up using a bunch of the embossing like static powder, and I just shook it up and it took the static away, which was nice. But then I was like, well, this kind of looks dumb. Like, I didn't really like the way it looked. So I finally gave in and decided to just make bulkier cards and go with the bats because I thought they looked better, the clay ones. And so now I'm finishing the strips that I cut at the beginning because I hadn't thrown out the second set that I made. And I'm glad I didn't, because that would have created more work in the end. And then I looked at the craft the note part that I made and decided that I needed more lines because half of that was not enough. So I did that real quick, and then I ran out of glue, so I had to use double-sided tape to stick together to put the little stacks on top of the frames that I had glued onto the base earlier. And then I ran out of tape, so I had to use some other glue that I had that I didn't want to use because the thing is clogged, but it worked out fine with a paintbrush. And then, yeah, here's the part where I'm just sticking it on too, because some of them I managed to do that with. And then I measured out an even amount of bats per card, because I only had so much, of course. And gluing the corners where the tape kind of didn't reach. And then finally just carefully sticking on the window. And then kind of the finishing part of this, sort of. I'm using some other double-sided tape I had to stick the frame, the glossy black frame on the front to cover up kind of the mess that you could still kind of see on the edges. And I realized that the glossy black paper also had a white back, but at that point I was very late with these cards, so I decided to just send them with that noticeable white part there. Off camera, I wrote out all the messages that I wanted to include, and so the final step was just to stick them onto the back. This is just the card I kept, it's blank. Here's one of the completed cards. I made one for my parents, and my mom does not like bats, but my dad doesn't really like ghosts, but it was between one or the other, so I went with the ghosts because I figured those at least aren't real. And so here's like, I didn't know my phone could do slow motion video, so that was a cool discovery, I guess. But yeah, that's just, I made a special one for my parents. And then here is the one that everyone else got, and you can see the bats get caught on the paste. Like, I'm still proud of these cards, but I don't know why I thought that would be a good idea. I just wanted to use the paste, I think. But okay, that was my process video. Also, during the final stretch of this process, I watched a playthrough of Crisis Core, and I was recording during the very final scene. I'm not gonna include it just because it's literally me going like, I hate this. Why? I hate it here. I just wanted to make that known that I watched Crisis Core during this, and it was sad.